In every one of us is a poor person. There's still a poor person inside me. There's also a middle class person, and the middle class person wants security. They want that steady paycheck. And there's a rich person. They're all inside of us, except that it's not taught. You're taught to go to school, get a job, and get a paycheck. You're not taught to how to get rich. It disturbed me that my own government would lie to me. You were being lied to as a people. Why would you save money when they're printing trillions of dollars? Why would you invest in the stock market for the long term when you have HFT, high frequency trading, and the Dow's at 18,000? The most obsolete idea is go to school, get a job, work hard, save money, get out of debt, and invest for the long term in the stock market. The gap between the 1% and 99% is massive. You see, it's not just money. You have to step back and look at the bigger picture. Too many people look at, well, what's going to happen to me? When you look at the big picture, you're also going to know that when something bad happens, something good's going to happen. But you got to prepare for whatever is coming. My success comes from spirituality, not finance. And what most people lack is real business knowledge, like accounting, like debt, like taxes. You gotta know that stuff, but they don't teach it in school to anybody. Failure should inspire you to get smarter. And unfortunately, our school system says if you fail, you're stupid. That is not true. We learn from our mistakes. Mistakes are opportunities to get smarter, be humble, and take a look at something. So if you fail, that's when I became an entrepreneur, because I had no money. I had no money for years. I didn't have a paycheck. My last paycheck, I still remember it clearly. It was one of the worst and the best days of my life. And I was in Puerto Rico. I was working for Xerox. And my boss gave me my last, it wasn't a paycheck, it was a bonus check. I think it was about $30,000. So I got this check and I went, holy mackerel. You know what I mean? So I was excited, but I was also disturbed. And so this other guy comes up to me, his name was John. And John says to me, he says, you're gonna be back. I said, why? He says, because you're gonna fail. Because that's what he did. He left Xerox, failed, and he came back. And I said, look, you failed and you came back, but I'm going to fail and I'm never coming back. And that's the attitude. Entrepreneurs have one thing in common. They keep going. They'll change the rules. They'll reinvent the rules. They don't just take one answer. If you're an entrepreneur and you're going to be a big entrepreneur, leadership skills and communication skills are more important than a law degree. Entrepreneur is a mindset first, a skill set, and rules. When you don't have this paycheck, you get hungrier, smarter, and it's a test of your character. Will you become a crook? Will you become dishonest? Will you cheat and steal? Or will you become a better human being? So really, that's the benefit of becoming an entrepreneur, is you really find out who you are when you don't have anything. A poor person with a poor personal economy, all they're going to see is a bad economy, because they don't know how to make money in any economy. And a middle class person, they have a middle class economy. What they want is a nice house and a steady paycheck and the job and the car. And so when you take their job away, to them, that's disaster. You mess with me, I'll find a way around it. Lesson number one in Rich Dad, Poor Dad is the rich don't work for money. What we do instead is we create businesses as entrepreneurs. We acquire real estate. I don't invest in the stock market. Okay? So the reason is because as entrepreneurs, I have more control over my income, how much I make, and how much I pay in taxes. And because I'm an entrepreneur as well as an investor in real estate, I pay zero tax. So every time I make, let's say, $1 million as an entrepreneur, I immediately invested in real estate and have a 4-to-1 step up. So I put $1 million in real estate, I get $4 million from the bank. That's why I love banks, because when you print, savers get creamed and people who work for money get creamed. When they print, debtors get rich. You see, debt and taxes make the rich richer. And debt and taxes make the poor middle class poorer. So all the rich guys who are doctors and lawyers, they're getting creamed, and they don't know why. My doctor just yelled at me, he's happy, he says, "Oh, guess what, I finally made $1 million. And so I said, yeah, well, how much you pay in tax? He says, $750,000 in tax. So his net was about $400,000. That's not bad. But when I make $1 million, I keep $1 million. And the reason is because I don't make it by working for money. You see, if you work for money, you're taxed. In America today, we have, even Ray Dalio of Bridgewater, one of the biggest hedge fund guys in America. He's saying this gap between the rich and everybody else is too wide. Well, you could have seen that back in 1972. Because the moment you corrupt money, the very thing that everybody works for, saves, counts on, they were screwed anyway. And our school systems, fake money, fake teachers, fake assets, part of that same system. Government, education, Wall Street, or City of London. And it goes back to the question I have always asked, why doesn't our school teach us about money? Because Wall Street won't let them. Our school systems are making our students weaker. So in school, they have these things called now trigger effects. So you can't, as a teacher, you can't say anything that might upset the student. They don't want anything that might jar their point of view. Isn't school about opening your eyes and minds to new ideas? But that's now out of the system. So everybody's got to be PC, politically correct now. And it's killing us. It's killing the brains of our kids. They're going backwards. But in their minds, they're more enlightened. It might be, but if I didn't have ideas that shook me, I wouldn't learn anything new. The school system will never teach you about money. The school system was designed to teach you to be an employee, which is important, or a doctor or a lawyer, a specialist, but never about money. So if you're not going to study, you're not going to practice and all that, then you should do what Wall Street tells you to do. Buy, 401ks, mutual funds, ETFs and all that. But that's where they're fake assets, because they only make Wall Street or the City of London rich. Just watch where the cash is flowing. Follow the money. Yeah. It's not making the poor middle class rich. All Wall Street in America has done is rip off the pensions, because pensions are the biggest pool of money in America. And states like Kentucky, New Jersey, Illinois, California, Hawaii are going bankrupt because Wall Street went in and just sucked all the cash out of their pensions. So the school teachers like my dad, the firefighters and police officers, they have no retirement now. But, unfortunately, the poor, as was in the Bible, I'm not real religious, the poor will always be amongst us, because it starts up here. It's in their words, and the words become flesh. Again, I'm not really religious. I flunked out of Sunday school also. But when they say I can't afford it or I can't do that, they go down. They become what they say. And I made so many people, I can't afford it. You think I'm made of money? My PhD dad, he says, what do you think I am, made of money? I can't afford that. And my rich dad would say, that's why he's poor. Poor people say, I can't afford it, I can't do that, I don't have time. Because it's an escape. It's an escape, It's easy to say, I can't afford it. Oh, I'm too tired. Oh, I can't go to the gym. When you could go to the gym, but no, I can't. Truth is, I'm just too lazy to go to the gym.
And your rich dad used to say what instead of, I can't afford it?
How can I afford it? How can I do that? What would it take? Or why should I do that? He says that a question opens the mind, a statement closes the mind. See, when you say, I can't afford it, your mind shuts down and you become what you say. People say, well, money is not that important to me. Then if money is not that important to you, money is not important to you. You know what I mean? I don't care about money. The money doesn't care about you. The word does become flesh. Or I'll never be rich. Or the favorite one is the rich are greedy. It's the poor that are greedy. You know, if you think about it, because to be rich, you have to give something. You know, you have to. I have to produce books and games, and I purchase real estate. I provide housing, provide jobs, and all that. That's why I'm rich. But greedy people produce nothing. So I remember raising my hand when I was 9 years old, talking to my fourth grade teacher, and I said, you know, when am I going to learn about money? And she was this woman who should have retired 50 years earlier. She was so sick and tired of kids by this time. She says, the love of money is the root of all evil. And I said, what am I, in Sunday school? That's this punky little 9-year-old kid. And she says, we don't teach money at school. I said, why not? And she couldn't answer me. And she got very flustered. She said, sit down, take your seat. And then I got curious. I said, why don't we learn about money? She says, go ask your father. He's my boss. So my father was the head of education. PhD, all that stuff. I go home and ask him, I said, why don't we learn about money in school? And he looked at me and says, because the government doesn't let us teach that subject. The government tells us what we can teach and what we can't teach. And I thought that was strange. And I said, but aren't we going to school to learn about money? He says, no, your job is to get a job. I said, but you get a job to earn money. He goes, no, you're supposed to just get a job. I went, no. Isn't the purpose of a job to earn money? He goes, you're correct. I said, so why don't I just learn about money? I can skip the job part, you know? And he got flustered and he said, look, and my father was, for Japanese, very tall, 6'4", and imposing man, good guy. But he says, if you want to learn about money, why don't you ask your best friend's father about money? And I said, why? That's Mike. So why ask him? He says, because Mike's father is an entrepreneur. And I said, what are you? He says, I'm an employee. I'm a government employee. I went, oh, what's the difference? He says, the difference is an entrepreneur must know about money, or they're no longer entrepreneurs. And he says an employee doesn't have to know anything about money, because the government will take care of them, the company will take care of them. But I took my dad's advice and I trundled over to Mike's father's office and knocked on his door and I said, hey, I'm here, 9 years old, teach me about money. He says, beat it, kid, you know. And finally, through persistence, my rich dad started teaching me about money on one condition. And that condition was he would never pay me. He says, the moment I pay you, you think like an employee. He says, that's the trap. Entrepreneurs work for free. And now I'm 9 years old, my head's going cracking in half. He says, you never want a paycheck. You understand that, kid? I said, okay, I got it. And he says, well, how do I make money? He says, that's what entrepreneurs figure out. So I would work for free. I'd pick up cigarette butts and get hotels and restaurants, and I would clean and do menial tasks. And as I got older, I started getting into office work and marketing and accounting, and I was an apprentice basically, but I always worked for free. And he would teach me about money, but the way he taught me about money was playing Monopoly. And finally one day I got upset. I said, well, when are you going to teach me about money? He says, what do you think we're doing? We're playing Monopoly. He goes, no. What do you think we're doing? I said, I don't know. I'm teaching you about money. There's many formulas for great success in money. There's thousands of them, but one of the best ones is found on the game of Monopoly. It still is today. 4 green houses, 1 red hotel. And he says, what do you think I'm doing? And I went, I don't know. So then he took me out and he showed me his greenhouses. And 10 years later, when I was 19, I was now in school in New York, and I come back to Hawaii, and Rich Dad had bought the biggest piece of land smack dab in the middle of Waikiki Beach. And when you go to Waikiki Beach today, you'll see the Hyatt Regency Hotel. That was his hotel. just like the game of Monopoly.
Acquired assets and they became bigger assets.
He just kept what's called an assemblage, because that property wasn't that big at that time. So he had to buy out all the small guys. So he'd buy out this shop owner and buy that shop owner. And it took him a while, but he finally assembled this large piece of property. Then he and Hyatt put up this giant hotel. And it just sold for $800 million. So that's how I learned about money.
They punish you for making mistakes. How stupid is that? So you have so many people that say, but what if I make a mistake? I said, you'll get smarter. You know, a baby doesn't learn to walk unless it falls down. But let's say the baby stands up, falls down, teacher goes, you stupid kid, you can't walk. They'll never walk. So when I meet people who are the academic types, that piece of paper that means nothing, most of them are so terrified of making mistakes. They say, what you do is so risky. While risk involves mental, emotional, spiritual, physical. Losing is part of winning. I think that's the thing that gets most people, because most frickin' school teachers tell you don't make mistakes. The reason school teachers are poor is we don't learn unless you make mistakes. You know, I flew for the U.S. Marine Corps. Every day we had to practice crashing 3 to 5 times a day. We practice crashing because the odds are you're going to crash. So I went down 3 times in Vietnam. But every time the engine quit or I got, it's automatic. You're always preparing for something to go wrong. Whereas in traditional school, everything's, sunshine and roses. I think the most important lesson I learned was choose your teachers wisely. So once I understood that I wanted to study with Fuller, I tracked him down. So when he gave a seminar, I went to listen to him. So I studied with Fuller for 3 summers. Once a year, and once in Hawaii, once there. And I sat there with him. And he asked me, it was about a class of about 100 people. And I'm sitting there, I don't like to share things by myself. And he kind of said, hey, what's your life's purpose? And here he is, the world's greatest genius. I said, I'm going to get rich. And in front of 100 people, he chews me out. Young man, getting rich is a waste of a good mind. What? And he goes, ask yourself this, young man. What does God want done? I said, what? What does God want done? Not what do you want to do? What does God want done? So I'm hurting inside because he chewed me out for 100 people. So I left there and I said, what does God want done? I thought about it. There's a poem I wrote about it in Rich Dad Poor Dad by Robert Frost. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep. The title of the poem was The Road Less Traveled. And I said, what am I supposed to do? And I said, I'm supposed to come back to Zimbabwe and teach. And I said, I get paid $0. But I made a promise to those people in 2002. I'd come back because I have promises to keep. And I created my cash flow board game. And I wrote Rich Dad Poor Dad. I said, there's no financial education in schools. I think if I was God, that's what I would want. So now my cash flow board game's there. They're teaching everybody. I'm doing 120 games, and they're going to start clubs all around Zimbabwe to teach people money. Come up. Because I've kept the promise. I'm going to teach these people.
You guys who are out there and you're trying to build something, the mistake I see here is like a lot of guys are looking for some cash flow. All right, they're looking for some cash flow to fund their lifestyle, and then they think their lifestyle is going to bring them more opportunity, which maybe there's a little truth to that. Like people do judge you differently when you drive a nice car and you take care of yourself and you're doing okay. You get invited to some more things. But you shouldn't put yourself in a position you're stretched to do that to a point where it's going to kill you. You have to realize that what's taught on the internet is basically just one aspect of building a brand and building a company that has enterprise value, right? Most of the people that are teaching on the internet are teaching how to build a funnel, how to sell a widget, and then rinse and repeat when the widget stops selling. That is one aspect. There's so many other things that you guys should be learning and paying attention to, because the idea, you don't get wealthy off the cash flow. You get wealthy off of the enterprise value and the portfolio value and the potential exits that you will have. So you guys who are young and you see all of this content, understand that that's an important tool, but it is like 10% of the tool. And the reality is that a lot of the shit that you see online is total bull. Okay? And it's appealing to young people because you don't have the perspective, right? All you know is that you don't have and you want some, right? So, and I can understand that, because when we started our retail store, I wanted to be rich. That's why I started it. Okay, I started it because I wanted to have a cool cars, and I wanted to be on the boats, and I wanted to have the girls, and I wanted to do all the things you all want to do. It didn't happen that way. And I've never seen it happen that way in a short term. I've never, ever, ever seen it happen. And if I see a glimpse of it happening, then we always see them get in trouble, or we see them go to jail, or we see something happen, and they fall, right? And my words to the young guys out there is just, dude, remember, you have a tremendous opportunity with the knowledge and the technology that's available, to where you should be spending that time working on something that when you're 35 or when you're 40 or when you're 45, it is worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And once I figured out that discipline is actually a skill set that we build, the game completely changed for me. And so when you think about discipline, instead of thinking about it like it's a trait that we're born with, I would encourage everybody to think about it as a skill set that you invest into. Sort of like a bank account, right? You're going to make deposits and you're going to make withdrawals. And when you do the things you're supposed to do, you're making your deposits, your discipline gets stronger. Just like every day you go in the gym, you get better and better and better and stronger and stronger and stronger. And once I started thinking like that, the game really changed for me. So I think people tried hard. My teachers tried hard. My parents tried hard. I had great parents. But it never took until I'm kind of like one of those people that has to learn things by fire. Like, I've got to touch the stove and figure it out. Like, I would love to say, oh yeah, man, I had all this grit and this toughness, and that's not what it was. It developed those things, but that's not what it was. What it was for me was I didn't have any other options. So when you don't have any other options, it's really actually the best place to be, because you can't turn around and go backwards. And I think, one of the most important things an entrepreneur can cultivate is the mentality of the zero options mentality. Okay, so when you start making money and you start doing well, it's very easy to get comfortable. It's very easy to take your foot off the gas. So you have to be able to convince yourself that you don't have an option. So even to this day, all right, I still feel like if I don't show up today and give it up my best, I'll be digging ditches next week. And I still come to work here every single day and feel like I'm going to lose. And I'm just running. And a lot of people will judge that, but I'm very grateful for it. I love that. And I think it's very important to cultivate that even when you're making a little money. Now, every meeting that we talk about is about how are we going to better serve the customer. When we reward people here, we don't there's not a single award in this company that is given out on sales numbers. It's all about how many lives are we changing? Are we helping people? How well are you helping people? And our individual recognition is based around that concept. Now, but for a long time, James, I was pissed off. I'm like, nobody believes in us. This guy had this advantage. They got this. Kind of how everybody thinks when they start, right? And I was angry about it. I was bitter about it. This is mental weakness. And it clicked for me. I got pissed off. And so I started thinking that was a big turning point, that one thing. And then what happened was I went on the podcast on MFCEO and I said, hey, this is what I'm doing. I'm doing it for the next 75 days. We're calling 75 hard. Those of you who want to do it with me. And a ton of people did it and they all fixed their shit. And after that, dude, I never ran an ad. I never did. It just went. If you solve a problem, people talk about it. And it solves the problem for people of what we call mental toughness, which includes things like discipline, grit, fortitude, perseverance, self-confidence, self-belief, the ability to endure hardships. And each aspect of 75 Hard teaches different lessons, and they all come together to create what's called mental toughness. And some people will criticize 75 Hard because they'll say, well, if it works so good, why do you got to do it more than once? Well, because discipline is a perishable skill. Okay, it's no different than playing a guitar. If you're really good at playing guitar and you put the guitar down for 2 years, when you pick it up, you're not as good, if you can even still play. I think the biggest thing people need to understand about mental toughness and discipline is that you have to practice it to get good at it. And it has to be part of your intentional practice. Living by the list is what I call it. Graduate high school, go to college, get a degree, get the white picket fence, do the mortgage and 2 kids. That never felt like me. I always felt like I wanted to do more. And I didn't know what that was. But I certainly never thought that we were going to be here. I thought differently about success. I thought it was something that was gifted to you, or you got lucky, or I call it the success fairy, right? The success fairy flies down from the success land and it hits one of us on the head and we get to be successful. I didn't really understand that it's as simple as inputs and outputs. I thought there was like a lot of magic to it. So I didn't know if I was going to be chosen to be successful. But all that time that we were sitting in the stores and we were just sitting there, we used to talk about all of the other brands, okay? And we'd say, man, if we were that company, why don't they do this? Why don't they do that? And then we would examine this company and say, they should be doing this, because we were getting feedback on the ground that they could never, ever know. And so, we kind of designed this company, First Form, in our brains. And the conversation was like this, man, one day, if we're ever fortunate enough to have the ability to start a brand, this is what it would be like, okay? And we saw a hole in the market, because back then, all the brands, all they were doing was making the cheapest possible product they could make. And that never made sense to me, because you're putting this in your body, you're putting it in there for performance, and nobody was trying to make the best. Nobody was making efficacious formulas that actually did what they said. They were pixie dusting ingredients and putting on the label and selling it. Like I said, the first 10 years, we really struggled. And the reason, I can say this confidently now, but I didn't realize it then. If you ask most people, what's the purpose of a business? What are they going to say? Make money, okay? And that's actually not true. The purpose of a business is to solve a problem. The purpose of a business is to create relief for a problem that somebody else is experiencing that they are willing to trade you money for. about 10 years into the business, when we weren't making any money, we had this part of our journey where we were going to quit. And we decided, hey man, you know, we may not, this isn't going to work, dude. We're now 10 years in and we're still making $695 a month, right? So we had to have a real talk with ourselves, like, okay, well, we need to do something. So I was going to go start a carpet cleaning franchise with my dad, and I went on a training trip for the carpet cleaning. And while I was on the training trip, I threw my back out, and I was kind of bedridden for like 30 days. It was pretty bad. And Chris and I were having these conversations, and I was like, dude, I really don't want to go clean carpets. Like, that really sucked. I did not want to do that. And this is embarrassing for me to share, but I was sharing it because it makes a point. There'd be people coming in the store, and me and Chris would be like, I bet I could sell them this. I bet I could sell them that. I bet I can do this. And that was our mentality. Like, what could we sell? What could we get from them? And we weren't worried about helping them. We didn't think about it like that. And so while we're having this conversation, which is why we didn't make any money, but every once in a while, when someone would come in the store, because we didn't see very many customers, there'd be someone who would come in and, you know, they were 100 pounds overweight. And we'd try to keep them in the store and talk to them, because honestly, like, we were bored and they were nice people, and we talked back and forth. And sometimes those people would go, and because we actually spent the time with them, they'd lose 50, 60, 70 pounds, 100 pounds, and they would come back in, dude, and they would be so grateful. They would be crying. They would give you a big hug. They say, Andy, Chris, thank you so much for showing me this and that. That was awesome. And we loved that. But we were young. We didn't connect that, like, oh man, like, that's the point of the business, until we were about to close it. We kind of gave up on our dreams, like our financial dreams. All right. We kind of said, okay, well, maybe we won't be rich. Maybe we won't have all the things we want. But man, there's a lot to actually changing people's lives. That's rewarding. That was the thing that we both really loved. And we said, okay, well, let's rework the business to just try and replicate that as much as possible. Let's replicate actually serving and helping people as much as possible. When we consciously took the intent from ourselves and put it to the customer, our retail business grew 100% the next 5 years. Okay, so that was like, when you say what was the turning point, it was a switching of the intent. It was from how much money can I make to how can I actually solve these problems? Because let's be real, what's the best marketing out there? Anybody who knows anything about marketing is going to tell you it's word of mouth. Okay, the way we buy things is we ask our friends, did you like that? Hey, what do you think of that tracksuit? I saw ads for that, but I didn't buy that. But do you like it? Yes, you like it. So now I'm like, okay, James likes it, so I'm going to go pick it up. So this word of mouth cultivation is what actually grows a brand, what grows a business. And so when you think about like building these relationships, the truth of the matter is that when you're good enough, they come to you. When you're doing great, people recognize you. Dana White is the most generous man that I've ever met in my entire life, with his time and his money. Okay? He will talk to anybody and help anybody with anything as long as he knows they're doing it. Okay? And so these guys up at the top, where, you know, the top of the rung, they want to help, but they're not going to drag you up the ladder, bro. You got to be climbing aggressively on your own. And so for me, I never like went out and saw it. And actually, you guys probably know this, but like one of the things that people probably say when I'm not around is like, Andy doesn't go anywhere. Like you got to go to him. I do my thing, but we've done it in such a way where it's gotten the attention of bigger people. And I've made some amazing friends and amazing relationships just by hustling, dude, and just by showing people that are bigger than me, like, hey man, I'm fucking worth knowing, you know?